In this video, I'll be showing you how to create a VPC in a few minutes. So you want to watch how to create a virtual private cloud on AWS cloud. To get started, let's move on to our AWS management console. Once you're on your AWS management console, you can see a list of AWS services based on your most recent visited services. And you can equally come here to services and search for any service which you're looking for. If you also want to check a particular service, you can type here. So we are going to be looking for VPC virtual. You could type virtual private cloud, or you could simply type VPC. So you can type virtual private cloud, or you could type VPC and it's going to show you. So let's click on your VPCs. Now if you click on your VPCs, it's going to take you to the VPC console. This is VPC console. You could equally come to the VPC dashboard that gives you more detailed insights onto related services around VPCs. You can have subnets. You can see all your VPCs in all different regions. You can see your NAT gateways. You can also see your VPC peering connections, your network access control list, your subnets, your route tables, internet gateways, security groups, your DHCP options. All of these are all services that relate to the virtual private cloud. So before even creating a VPC, you must understand what the virtual private cloud service is and what all these related services with respect to VPCs are concerned. You can also see your VPCs here. So if you click here, you'll be able to see your VPCs. Currently in my account, I have a default VPC. And you also need to take note that the VPC service is region specific. So you can always have VPCs based on different regions. For example, I'm in the Oregon region and I'm creating these VPCs in the Oregon region, but you can create your VPCs maybe in Ohio or in North Virginia, in California or in Mumbai or Osaka based on the project needs. So I'm going to be creating this VPC in the Oregon region. So to create a VPC is simple. You come here, you click on create VPC. Now there are two ways in which you can create a VPC. You can create a VPC where you create only the VPC without any related resources. You can specify CIDR range, or you can create a VPC and more, meaning you can create a VPC and related services. So let's look at the first use case where you're just creating a basic VPC for use. So I'll click on create VPC only, and we can give it a name. Let's call it the Devops VPC. Now take note, VPC work in CIDR blocks. You can check a little bit more about CIDR blocks. So if you click on info here, it'll tell you the CIDR block basically specify an IP or IP address ranges for your VPCs. VPCs are all about virtual private cloud, and in the private cloud, you want to assign resources, different IP addresses. So based on the VPC IP address pool available in this region, you can use these VPC CIDRs to give specific CIDR blocks. So for you to specify a particular CIDR block, AWS even recommends a given CIDR block. Like for example, we have 10.0.0.0. So based on your organization, you can choose a specific CIDR block, and they say CIDR block must be between /16 and /24. This /16 and /28 represents the number of IP addresses that this given VPC can have. So let's just use the default 10.0.0.0/16, which is the minimum. And once you select that, the next thing which you need if you want to have IPv6, you can enable IPv6. If you do not want, you can disable that. And then equally as far as tenancy. And by the way, one thing you should note is if you need any information about any configuration you want to make, you can always click on info and you get a lot more insight about a given configuration. So you click on tenancy. If you want this tenancy to be default, or you want it to be default dedicated tenancy, you can enable that, but will allow it as default. And then now you give the tag. The tag basically is the way in which you want to identify this VPC. So you have to click. So if you have to create only the VPC, you can select VPC only. You give the VPC name, you give the VPC CIDR block, and then you allow the tenancy as default, and you click on create VPC. So once you click on create VPC, you're going to see that this VPC was created. So you successfully created VPC. They give you the VPC IP address, the VPC ID, and then they give you the VPC name which you selected. And some key things to note is the VPC ID, which you can use to reference in any configuration around your AWS. You get the VPC ID for the resource map. This VPC has just been created only. You don't have any subnets attached to this VPC. It comes with the default route table and then no network configurations. as well as it gives you some other details around the VPC. Is it a default VPC? Some other network configurations, the VPC CIDR, the owner ID, which account owns this VPC, and a lot more. So this was the first option. You can also get some other actions for this VPC. You can edit VPC settings, you can create a flow log, you can edit CIDRs, you can manage and so on, delete the VPC and so on. So what we are going to do next is we'll be creating another VPC. So let's go back. We'll be creating, you go back again, we'll be creating, if you now see our VPCs here, you see there's a new VPC that was created, the Devops VPC. Now let's create another VPC using the VPC and more. So you see the difference between creating VPC only and then the VPC and more. So to create a VPC using VPC and more, you click on create VPC and then you select VPC and more. This gives you the possibility to create the resources related to a VPC, subnets, security groups, and all of that. So if you select VPC and more, the first thing is for you to do a name tag auto generation. So what this does is it automatically tags all the resources in this VPC. So assuming that the VPC name is, let's say, scaling, or let's just say this VPC is for the name of a company. Let's give the name of the company Wonder Prep. So if you select Wonder Prep with the auto generate tag, you see it starts tagging all the resources with respect to the name which you gave the name of your company. If it's Wonder Prep, it gives the resources based on the company name. If it's JP Morgan, you tag all the resources with respect to JP Morgan. If it's Effulgence Tech, it will tag all the resources with respect to Effulgence Tech. So the auto generation tag helps you to easily tag all the resources. So let's use Wonder Prep. Now, if you want to check the VPC CIDR block, you can see it automatically gives you a CIDR block and it tells you the number of IP addresses that this VPC can have. So if you use a /16, you see we have 65,000 IPs. If you use a /17, we have 32,000. The number, as you increase, the number of IPs decrease right up to 28. You now see we have just 16 IPs available. Now let's use the /16. If you use /16, they ask you, do you want a tenancy to change default or dedicated, or dedicated? Now, do you want this VPC in 2 different availability zones? Now, in availability, if you select 2 availability zones, if you come here, you see you have VPC subnets in maybe your region, maybe like we're in Oregon, so you have in the US West 2A, and then we have in US East 2B. But if you select it to be only in one availability zone, you see it will just be in US West 2A. Remember, it's with respect to the region in which we are using or which we are creating this resource. We are currently creating our resources in the US West 2 region, Oregon region. That is why you have US West 2. So if I was to select tenancy as if I was to select number of availability zones as 2, I'll have US West 2A, 2B, and the same thing if I select 3, I'll have US West 2A, 2B, 2C to represent 3 different availability zones which this VPC has. So let's allow it at 1 VPC, or let's allow it at 1 availability zone. Now the number of subnets, of public subnets, normally a public subnet is use public subnets for web applications that need to be publicly accessible over the internet. So if you want to have a public subnet or a subnet that can be publicly accessible over the internet, you can do that using the public subnet. So if you want a public subnet, you can allow it as 1. Take note, if you have the availability zone as 1, if you select 1 availability zone, you definitely have 1 subnet, 1 public subnet. If you select 2, you have the possibility of having 2 public subnets. 3, you have the possibility of having 3 public subnets. So let's allow it at 1, and then we have 1 public subnet. Now, number of private subnets. Private subnets also gives you the possibility to secure your resources. So you use private subnets to secure back-end resources that don't need public access. So once you select private subnet, you can either select, if you need 2 private subnets, if you select 2, you see you have 1 public subnet and 2 private subnets. But if you select 1, you have just 1 public subnet and 1 private subnet. So we are going to allow it at 1. Now, do you need a NAT gateway? Take note, NAT gateways are very expensive because they have an elastic IP attached to it. So for now, you do not need a NAT gateway because you don't want to be built. And then you can equally have, do you need endpoints? Endpoints help you to reduce the charge. So by default, you can use some of these endpoints to access resources within your VPC. So once you have all of this configured, it gives you a preview. This is one of the advantages I'll say for the VPC and more. It gives you a resource map preview of all the resources which will be created. If you want to take the route for the resources which you create, once you select the VPC, you can have a public subnet. The public subnet will have a public route table, and this public route table will have an internet gateway attached, which is the internet gateway that makes it publicly accessible. So with this map, you see we move from the VPC, the subnet, the route table, and the network connections. If you don't have any idea on what VPCs and all those configurations are, you can always use VPC and more. That will help you out in all those configurations. Equally, if you want to check out how to set up the private subnet, we have the VPC. You can see the private subnet, we have a private route table, and then we have a VPC endpoint attached to it. So this is basically how you can create a VPC and more. After you selected all those configurations, you click on create VPC. Now once you click on create VPC, you see all the resources that will be created. The create VPC completed, DNS host name, DNS resolution, verifying creation, is creating the subnet, public subnet, created the private subnet, created internet gateway, attach the internet gateway to the VPC. It has created a route table, create a route, and then associated route table. So all of these are different configurations. If you have to use a configuration management tool like Terraform or CloudFormation, you still need to carry out all these processes. But on the management console, all of this is done automatically. Once you have a success here, you need now to click on view VPC to see the VPC resources that have been created with this VPC. And once you click on that, you now see we have the VPC ID, the CIDR range, the owner. You can see the resource map, the VPC, the two subnets attached to the VPC, the route tables, and then some network connections like the NAT, like the internet gateway. So this is basically more. And as far as this VPC is concerned, you can get CIDR ranges, VPC this, you can see flow logs to get logs on how traffic is moving into and out of this VPC. You can view tags, you can view integrations, and so on. So this is a little bit about virtual private clouds.